basically anyone else would see possible, and then be able to just cruise the run and still win the race. And then you couple that with the destinations that you've never seen before or never imagined seeing, the new people that you're meeting, all of the major climbs, and you can feel that in the community. It's not just a race. Well, I suppose in essence, and the reality is, I was placing the shield up through the fear that I wouldn't be capable to perform the way that I had previously. Oh, quite a few internal organs, a whole bunch of blood, and getting an interesting brain injury. So in this time, that was, I suppose, what one might call
Matthew Lloyd, listen, thank you for joining me on the podcast today. Looking forward to our conversation.
Yes, thank you very much, Ryan. It's a pleasure of mine to be with you this morning.
Great, and listen, I know we've been chatting before, and really just trying to, get an understanding of your career, your transition, and sort of what you have sort of worked through as well. And I think that's going to provide some interesting insight for those listening, joining us today. So thanks in advance for certainly being open.
Not a problem at all.
Well, look, let's kick in. What I do like to do is just get that lay of the land. So I just ask, can you tell us who you are? Give us that infomercial about who you are and what you're up to nowadays.
Yeah, obviously, name's Matthew Lloyd. I was a member of the 2008 Olympic road cycling team for Australia, national champion 2008 as well, winner of the Tour of Italy's mountain climbers classification in 2010, Tour de France rider, and basically, in a cycling sense, that encapsulates all of my greatest achievements. And the journey itself unfolded basically from then on.
Yeah. And well, what drew you to cycling in the first place?
I suppose an intrinsic sense of freedom that I had from being a youngster. For a lot of the time, my brother and I, my close or best friends and I would not just be shredding the urban jungle around Bayside, Victoria, but taking our bikes out to Mount Buller and Mansfield, and being with the nature, which was cool, because it not only gave that sense of time and space and freedom, but it was also a really cool way to get yourself out there. And I suppose that continued throughout my life, not even in a competitive sense, but just an attachment with the environment and the land. So yeah.
I mean, it actually sounds quite magical. It's making me think of sort of the way you describe it, sort of coming of age movies that we probably grew up watching back in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah. As corny as that is, it's quite true.
Well, that's good. And so, you mentioned there with your brother. So, were you quite a sporty family, an outdoorsy family?
Yeah, definitely. My father was a world class yachtsman, and from a young age, my brother and I and mother ended up traveling around the world, living in the US for an extended period of time. So my dad was part of the America's Cup team for Australia in 1991, and uh, had basically races in all the key yachting destinations throughout the world, including Australia, in which he won the Sydney to Hobart 3 times. So that was definitely a huge component to my upbringing, and something that I did look up to then, and I still do now.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. Wow. Well, that's quite amazing, really. With a father being a yachtsman like that. Did you get to travel? Did you sort of go with him, or is it something where he disappears for a period?
Yeah, for the most part, the bigger international um, amounts of time was spent as a family. We'd move to say Hawaii for different yachting races in which he was racing for a Japanese owned yacht over there, and then over to San Diego in the US again for the America's Cup time, and ended up going to basically primary school in the US for quite a while,
Hmm.
um, and otherwise um, throughout Europe
Yeah.
and that sort of thing as well. So yeah, it was always on the move, um,
Hmm.
but then he'd always have time periods in which he had to go and race uh, with a crew um, in any destination that he was called to. So there was that component as well.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So I suppose then coming back to you and this cycling journey, because you clearly you getting to see the world and travel at the same time. When did cycling become for you something where you thought, hey, hold on, there's talent here, there's an opportunity to do something?
Um, yeah, I guess the main uh, sort of turning point for me was um, around 2002, in which I was racing, I think the Gatorade series for um, under 23 triathlon in Victoria, and some coaches noticed that um, my swim leg within the triathlon was almost appalling. It was like watching a disabled porpoise trying to, fail at catching fish. But on the bike, it always just go a lot faster um, than basically anyone else would see possible,
Yeah.
um, and then be able to just cruise the run and still win the race, um, or come on the podium. And this happened so frequently that I ended up winning the series. And um, I spoke then to Kerry Hall, um, who was Kathy Watt's coach, living locally in Bayside, and he said the the indications here are that you should, by all means, take it to road cycling because you're wasting your time in triathlon. Um, so I did, and from then on, it sort of went through the stages of racing local criteriums and uh, local road races, in which I started to really get an idea of how racing was um, on the road in Victoria at those stages, and then started to take it interstate, um, and ended up targeting specifically the National Road Series, where the only really mountainous stage was stage that finished on the top of Mount Borbor, and miraculously, I won a raffle that particular year. So instead of riding around on my 10 kilo, can't remember the brand name bike it was, but I bought a Trek Madone, which is a model that Lance Armstrong had won the Tour de France on. So I just sort of made a calculation in my head. I'll buy one of
Yeah,
those.
that must be a good one. Yeah.
And simultaneously went on to win that stage of the Herald Sun Tour.
Yeah.
Um, and after that point in time, you sort of get recognised. And yeah, by that point, I had communication with some um, semi-professional teams and whatnot in France. And the next year, I was over there racing, um, in a whole mixed bag of various
Yeah.
different races, both mountainous and and cobbled and flat and everything. So yeah, it was incredibly fast.
Yeah.
Um, but I think for my frame of mind at that point in time, it was new and adventurous and something
Yeah.
cool to do. So yeah,
I mean that does sound pretty cool. Even just listening to you there as well. That sort of journey, targeting races, what thinking about where you could become or what you could become. And so for
yeah.
you at that time, what dream did you start to have?
Well, I suppose all the dreams started to take place. I suppose with um, the greater sense of the sport and what it had meant to me, because I still held dear all those elements that I had from when I was a lot younger, that sense of pure freedom. And because it
Mm,
came with objectives, whether they were um, races that involved more climbing or target points that I could see myself doing well in, um, there was a purpose to it.
mhm.
And just by happenstance, the places that I was doing these races in were the exact same races in which I could watch the Tour de France firsthand and um, and speak to people who were, part of the greater organisation. Um, so it all fit into place quite well, um,
Yeah.
and I was just on it for the ride.
And you talk about that ride in navigating that journey to climb up, the ranks. What guidance or management did you have to support you?
I think from a greater sense, initially programming wise, I still stuck by what I had picked up from Kerry Hall, a lot of the strength endurance stuff, and being from um, being from a pure sprinting background, he was able to influence my way of riding, in which um, he'd trained Kathy Watt in the road discipline, so the endurance side of things was also taken care of. Um, but then, as well as that, um, having uh, Josh Wilson on my team at that point in time um, in southern France, his father, Michael Wilson, um, was a fantastic ex-professional, and he would come and visit us and actually go on some rides with us.
Mhm.
Um, and provide insights um, into climbing specifically, because that was his jam. And smaller details like that were sort of were crucial,
Mm.
um, because at that point in time you sort of you're clutching at any marginal advantage you can get on a you know on a set of competitors who have been brought up in this sport and know every single detail about it. Um,
Yes.
so, interestingly enough, yeah, I was able to absorb all that knowledge and just do the best that I could with it. And
Yeah.
fortunately, it did yield some success.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess it did. I'm interested then because here, you're talking about that emerging success coming through academically, work-wise. How were you, what were the importance? How are you funding your life at this point?
At this point in time, I had been working. I'd actually been working at the the local cinemas
Yeah.
in Bayside, Brighton, um, for uh, for about 2 years before heading over to Europe. Um, and in reality, when I got there, uh, it was it was pretty much a single room apartment. Um, Fortunately, the food in France is quite uh, is quite
It was,
alright,
yeah,
and
it's
I
got
was
a
able,
good standard.
yeah, and I was
Yeah.
able to be of the fortunate position in which the people who were part of the team's organisation were in the position to take care of me in that regard, um, and travel things like that were fortunately um, taken care of by the team, and I
Mhm.
was massively supported by my family. Um,
Right. Yeah.
so had I
So,
not had those, advantages,
mm,
it would have been a real challenge.
yeah. Um, I suppose, did you have an alternative? Because the thing about cycling is you really, I guess with actually with all sport, you really have to give it your all. But
Yeah,
with cycling, you are, I guess, well, one of my friends, the way he described it to me is you spend a lot of your career not winning. Um,
yeah,
you know, you're part of the team. Your job isn't to win. Your job is to graft, to grind, and you're putting in all of that, as I suppose, effort. So I'm interested in that psyche, but I just wanted to know if you were not going to be a cyclist at that point, did you have an alternative plan? Did you have another desire or wish?
yeah. Definitely. Prior to my time starting overseas, I'd been doing um, a a course or a degree in criminal justice
Mm,
and psychology, and at that point in time, for one reason or another, the the uptake of criminal investigation internationally was huge because it was close um, to the September 11th incidences,
mhm.
and I was intrigued by that, and had always been um, interested by criminal psychology. Um, so, being in the final terms of that degree, it was definitely something that I had avenues to go down. Had the quick succession of the cycling career not taken off in the direction that it did,
Yeah.
um, and yeah, I mean, um, even to this day, some of the things that I'm still interested by um, tend to fall within the same um, categories of interest, might you say?
Yes. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Interesting. We'll look, we'll probably certainly look back and understand a bit of that. So, I'm I'm now getting this sense of great, you had this other interest. So cycling, really was this opportunity to follow your passion
yeah.
and pursue that. Um, so in those early days, certainly overseas, as one of the team riders, I mean, What was that? Yeah, actually, because I have no idea. I've really only recently got in, I said relatively recently got into cycling. So what was it like for you?
Um, to be honest, it was magic because every element of it uh, was fresh and new, and exciting. Because uh, when looking at it from you know uh, a general perspective, and I've noted this to other people more recently than not, the the consciousness in my looking at it was like the pre-conscious phase
Mm,
of everything being worthwhile because it's fresh and new. Um, everything's a great challenge and something to overcome,
mhm.
and every experience is valuable because you're always learning something. Um, and then you couple that with the destinations that you've never seen before or never imagined seeing,
Yeah.
the new people that you're meeting, and all the achievements that they've been able to overcome. Um, so for me, it was just a magical place to be
Mm,
in,
yeah.
and I was just getting amongst it. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And so, you opened up a little bit on some of those highs of your career, and you know, like you say, you're in this magical, magical career, which I think when we ask many athletes, throughout the show, those early years are wonderful, right? It's the best time of your life. You're living that passion.
yeah.
When you think of, well, actually, what was it like then becoming Australian champion and indeed representing Australia at the Beijing Olympics?
Yeah, the interesting thing with the the Australian Championships was that I'd I'd almost gotten to the point in which my training program and um, my lifestyle was at a place where um, I was able to visualize the event um, before it took place the way that it did,
Mhm.
um, which sounds kind of strange, but uh, looking back um, you know, into the neuroscientific standpoint of things, that visualization that I was able to do beforehand on countless occasions um, probably allowed me to put myself in the place that I ended up being in at that point in time, um, in the reality.
Yeah.
Uh, so for me, it didn't come as a surprise. Um, it was just part of what I was doing at that point in time. Um,
So
and
did you see it as a success then?
I did. Um, and I guess the way that I looked at it then was something that I should have been capable of doing, and I did do it. Um,
Mhm.
so from a I suppose an objective point of view, you could say it's just ticking a box, but from the subjective point of view, it's a huge elation and just a fantastic accomplishment.
Mhm. Mm. And I mean, I guess then from building from that to attending at attending the Olympics or representing your country at the Olympics, was that, how did that feel from that career trajectory, box ticking versus that, enjoyment factor, that ability to pause and enjoy it?
Well, I suppose the interesting dynamic um, for the Olympics is it is simply that it's the Olympics.
Mm.
And that that sense of that sense of connection with your country um, is potentially only done through that event in itself. Um, and whether or not that's brought on from an internal perspective, or whether it's brought on through the way in which we're brought up as children in each country, um,
Yeah.
I
So,
think it's quite a special thing. But as far as the racing's concerned, um, I pretty much took it as any other race, with uh, with all the other world tour candidates who were
mm,
um, very much within the same potential to win on that particular occasion.
yeah.
Um, which is sort of a strange way to look at it, but I suppose it's the way sport is.
Well,
And
yeah. What's interesting is it sounds like at the Olympics there you felt you were representing your country. However, in the normal, I say in the typical season or the typical tours, you it sounds like you weren't representing your country, but you were representing your team.
yeah, definitely. And with I suppose with 2008 was quite different. Having won the national championships, and you have to wear the Australian colours the whole year.
Mm,
Um, there's a certain element of expectation, and fortunately, me for what it was worth at that point in time, my performances throughout a lot of the races were of a good standard, and I felt proud of my jersey,
mhm.
um, and what that brought to it. But I'm quite sure that it wasn't the jersey that was speaking to me. It was, the intrinsic sense of who I was as a person,
Yeah.
and also the the role that I had to play within the team itself.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah,
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, okay. Listen, certainly one of the highs for you was in the Giro d'Italia. I'm trying to
yeah,
think what we say in English. I don't know, Grand Tour of Italy. I'm not sure what we say. We just say Giro d'Italia, don't we?
yeah.
This is me trying. I'm trying to make sure I'm not being some sort of fancy European
That's all
and
good.
saying it in that way. But you were the first Australian to win that King of Mountains classification. And when you think about that dreams that the climbing was that, I mean, how important for you was that in terms of you know pinnacles of your career or achievements in your career?
I think uh, in retrospect, it was um, something uh, that I had planned on, or set as a goal, um, from the moment I've become professional,
Mm,
um, purely because of uh, I suppose you'd call it the um, the romance um, with climbing in Italy,
mhm,
because there's a certain characteristic to the roads there, to the passion, um, to a sense of history attached with all of the major climbs, and you can feel that in the community.
mhm,
Um, it's not just a race; um, it's it's part of the fabric of the culture. And when you're a rider in that element, um, and you feel that intrinsic sense of belonging.
Mm.
To me, it brought something special. So to be able to go out and do that as an objective, and also to do it in a way that was uh, even for me quite profound,
Mm.
was a huge uh, moment, and something that I could only explain by saying, I was just in a different universe. Um,
Right.
I mean, it sort of spoke to me about often being in the zone, um,
Mm.
and um, and having a different mindset. But for that race in itself, um, I'd found a different module somehow,
Yeah.
and it was just it was just a phenomenal experience.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. You found that flow and everything, everything aligned, made it extra special in many respects.
Yeah,
Yeah. And I suppose at that point, you, because you did say retrospectively you were able to see it. As you look back at that actual time, to what extent did you see that as really, well, this is merely a platform on to whatever's next, whatever's, going to follow would be more stage wins, more jersey wins, and sort of propel your career in that way. Was that kind of the sense you had?
yeah, definitely. I think at that point in time, um, given reference to the leverage that can give someone, or gave myself in an immediate sense, uh, there's a tendency to to just believe,
Mm.
or know that the possibilities are out there. Um, so um, in contrast to many races where you finish and questions are raised about potential of performance, and um, you know is my output really good enough to match it at the top level?
Mhm.
Um, when instances occur, as they did at that Giro, um, it really it really takes the pressure off, and you allow
Yeah.
yourself the space to explore.
Mm. Yeah. And well, look, from around this point, you then faced, I guess, some rather significant injuries. Back injuries, breaks. How did you, I guess, how did you cope physically, and sort of mentally with those setbacks and that fight to get back to that same sense or feeling that you had at the Giro d'Italia?
Well, this was the definite turning point for me. Um, Following the Tour de France, um, in 2010,
Yeah.
um, I was really physiologically and psychologically uh, spent, um, and didn't really allow myself the time to unwind. Um, and following that time in December, there was an incident where I did fall and have some minor uh, damage to my brain, and broke my shoulder. Um, Unfortunately, from that point in time, um, the racing program back in Europe was to kick in um, shortly uh, after February had finished and March had started. And my stubborn set of thinking thought to myself, well, I can definitely manage this um, by myself and get back into the racing scene.
Mhm.
Um, but what I'd in fact done was damage myself in trying to come back too early,
Mhm.
um, and it became a non-user friendly environment, so to speak.
In what way?
Where Well, I basically wasn't able to operate or function in a normal um, in a normal set of uh, living standards or behaviours that I'd see fit, um, because I'd basically been attempting to hold up a shield to the discomfort I was in, but the
Mhm.
shield got too heavy, and that
Right.
meant that you know um, I'd finish time throughout general training or trying to get back into form, and it just wouldn't happen.
Right.
Uh, what I was in fact trying to do was replicate the steps that I'd taken to be in the form I had uh, the previous year to be competitive and to win races. Um, but the body wasn't able to agree with me,
Mhm.
and I wasn't really doing things to the body um, that would have made it, you know, that would have made it possible in the first place.
Yeah,
Um,
and you talk about a shield. You talk about that shield. What I suppose was it to protect, or what were you trying to protect with the shield?
well, I suppose in essence, and the reality is, I was placing the shield up through um, the fear, the fear that I wouldn't be capable to perform the way that I had previously. Um, and, in a world which I knew to be cutthroat and I knew to be performance based, because it has to be that way. Um, if I wasn't able uh, to do the things that I was there to do, um, I had to try and hide behind uh, this, you know, this mask of, oh, everything will be just fine and I'll be back in a couple of weeks. Whereas in fact, that wasn't going to be possible. So yeah,
And, and then so what was that impact, I guess, medium term, long term? What was the impact on you physically and mentally?
well, I suppose the main impact was probably the psychological impact, um, having to uh, accept the fact that um, my team definitely couldn't endorse someone who was injured, um, and not displaying the characteristics of someone who was going to be back in action, at least within uh, the immediate sense. Um, and also, I think secondarily to that, um, living in a place which was so driven by the fact that everything I was done on a template of the racing season, of uh, the training um, regimen and template. Um, I hadn't seen any other ways to approach things um, other than those parameters previously. Uh, so the time period in which I did take uh, to reflect in that time was nothing really valuable.
Mhm.
Um, and looking back at it retrospectively, um, ended up being quite a dark period. Um, only
Mhm.
through the assistance of my previous director, uh, um, he was able to link me up um, with my then manager at the time, um, and facilitate movement into a different world tour team for the start of the next year.
Yeah.
Um, so that provided me the avenue to re-establish myself in a reasonable time frame.
Hmm.
And the interesting thing about it was that while given that new template and um, new lease of life, I suppose,
Yeah.
what I did was I immediately went into the process of replicating what I did do um, before the Giro to get myself in
Mm-hmm.
top condition before the Australian Championships. Um, and at the start of the next season, ended up coming second in those championships to
Yeah.
Simon Gerrans. And the following week, um, I crashed the Tour Down Under and slipped immediately back into a cycle of negativity because all the
Yeah.
old injuries that I'd done to myself were broken again,
Yeah.
and all the same habits that I'd had the year beforehand that I just magically thought I'd got away with came back with just as much ferocity as they did the year before. Um,
And,
so that involved, you know, things that, athletes tend to become really vulnerable to, and that,
yeah.
that did involve, drinking way too much.
Hmm.
Um, and you know, when you live in a world in which you're so used to dealing with high pain thresholds and whatnot, um, the extremities that you'll go to, particularly when the body itself is broken,
Yeah.
um, can be quite ridiculous and extremely dangerous.
Mm.
So yeah.
And during that period for you, that, and that's a really, it's a dark period. You recognizing these habits, these negative habits, negative thoughts coming back. Um, in many respects, I suppose I'm trying to understand how did you, well, how did you cope? And I suppose I should say, were you coping?
I honestly, I honestly don't think um, I was coping at all. What I did do extremely well is tell myself that I was coping.
Right.
Um, I was actually so good at it that I had other people believing in my capabilities to cope with it, and um,
So for you,
and that was
what was at stake for you? I mean, this coping mechanism. What was at stake for you? What were you fighting for?
at that point in time I was fighting for my own sense of strength or my own internal sense of who I was as a person. Um, and looking back at that now, what would have been stronger would have been to put out my hand and say, I'm not dealing with this at all. Um, can you help me? But I was too stubborn for that. And the the most interesting part to it was that this wasn't the last time in which the same pattern unfolded again. So
Right.
there's uh, there's a lot to be said through pattern recognition and having having done it to myself. Um, it's it's interesting to look back at it and
Yeah.
really pick it apart.
Hmm. Yeah. During this phase, to what extent did you think retirement athletic retirement was on the cards?
I really don't think in this point um, it came across to me, only because having uh, having had all the success only a year and a half beforehand, and then getting myself back into a position uh, to be, second in the national championships, and then have a mishap happen again and downplay it like that. I thought to myself, oh, yeah, I really should be able to turn this around, and get back into it if I really, really commit myself. Um, which to uh, to the unexperienced person, or looking back at it as myself at the time being, um, I'd say you're crazy. you know, what are you thinking to yourself? Look, there's 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 a wide world out there waiting for you. All you're going to do now is potentially damage yourself,
Mhm.
all those around you.
Yeah,
That just didn't enter the mindset, and yeah, um, yeah.
right. And so, what happened next then? How did you, you have this fixation, you're staying as the athlete, it's not time to leave. How did things unfold?
Well, I was back in Australia, um, having sort of well, I finished the 2013 team uh, work with Lamprey um, at the end of the season, and um, during that time, I'd had a number of crashes. The biggest one was at the Tour de France, um, breaking my elbow again, and um, managed to get back to Australia, um, and and thought to myself, well, I'll put myself onto the market and see what comes about. Um, and this time period led to some change, and led me uh, to the United States, um, racing with Team Jelly Belly, based out of California. And during that time, um, my condition was average, to say the best. Um, I I wasn't really um, performing at any level that would be suggestive to that of a world tour um, cyclist. And to be honest, I think people were asking questions. You know, why change continents for? Um, have issues been so great over the other side that you had to change out of compulsion, or was this a strategic move? Um, and all of those things were definitely not just on my mind, but on the mind of others as well. Um, so that was basically from the start of 2014. You there?
Sorry, Matthew. I'm back.
Ah,
I was
that's
I
all
was on I was on mute asking questions. Um,
right. Ah, sorry.
what question? And I suppose it people were asking questions about you and that move again overseas, and for you, well, perhaps as you look back, did that feel like it was an the last attempt on another shot at saying I can get back to my best?
Yeah, definitely. Because I wasn't going to give up. Um, I was, I was, I was so intrinsically stubborn, um, that I had the capabilities to reform myself and deliver on
Hmm.
any stage. Um, and that was incredibly difficult to, um, you know, to sort of battle with. And looking back at it now, I think that internal struggle was definitely detrimental for my you know for my for my output.
Yeah, yeah.
Because it's paradoxical thinking to yourself that you know you are getting stronger, but that energy that you expend to get to that point is
Hmm.
quite useless itself. Um, so all the races before um, before the tour of Utah and tour of Colorado, towards uh, the August timeframe,
Hmm.
were basically used in preparation to get myself into a somewhat reasonable condition in order to take out those two races at 110%.
Hmm.
And um, yeah, just remind myself and the world of my capabilities.
Yeah.
Um, but that did not happen.
Hmm. No. And so, what was the hardest part for you to deal with when it became clear that didn't happen?
Um, yeah, I suppose, uh, given the fact that um, given the fact that I suppose the week before um, the tour of Utah, in particular, I had been um, throughout uh, throughout the Evergreen area um, in the Rockies, because I was living in Colorado, and there's an area out there, just the base of Mount Evans, which is a huge mountain. Um, it's probably about 45 kilometers from Denver,
Hmm.
and the altitude is about 3,300 meters in Evergreen, and that's where I was living at that point in time. Um, and I'd gone through about 6 weeks of training in which I simulated, um, to the second, um, the exact replica of what I'd been able to have output wise, um, and oxygen uptake was before the tour of Italy in 2010.
Hmm.
Um, and that was just on the numbers. But the sense of connection with the environment was, um,
Mm.
on the next level again. And I felt, I just felt incredible. Um, and then, unfortunately, the the
Mm.
day of the first stage of the tour of Utah,
Yeah.
um, I was hospitalized with pneumonia
Right.
and septicemia.
Hmm.
Um, and they didn't know where that came from. I can only guess now that I'd probably got myself so deep in the zone through my own training beforehand
Hmm.
that I'd become susceptible to uh, the conditions at high altitude.
Yeah.
Um, Something along those lines.
Hmm.
And spent a number of days in the hospital and finally um, was discharged and decided to fly back uh, at about 6:30 the next morning um, to Denver. And unfortunately, that point in time, all the hotel restaurants were closed.
Hmm.
Um, and I asked the receptionist, "Is there any places for food nearby?" And she displayed to me that, yeah, there were some restaurants just down the road there. Just cross over at the intersection and you'll get yourself something to eat. Um, so it was around 9:30 at night, and
Mm.
I went to cross the road, waited for the green man, all that good stuff you learned to do as a kid. Stepped into the road and don't remember anything from that point in time.
Right.
Um, Pretty much for the next 5 to 6 days, um, I wasn't. Uh, I just wasn't there.
Right.
Um, and yeah, what had happened was I unfortunately got hit by a hit and run driver while
Hmm.
walking across the road, um, fracturing my skull,
Yeah.
breaking my spine,
Hmm.
um, shattering the pelvis, um, losing most of, well, quite a few internal organs, a whole bunch of blood, and getting an interesting brain injury.
Right.
So
Yeah.
um, in this time, uh, that was, I suppose, what one might call an ending procedure,
Hmm.
um, but not being in a conscious position to acknowledge that at the time.
Hmm.
Um, I just had to be held together by machineries and other people's blood in order to, uh, get one sentence across.
Yeah.
It kind of went like,
Wow.
what? Well, this wasn't the hotel room I was going to bed in.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, the surgeons, when they did wake me up, they said, "Oh, um, well, this is the situation." I said, "Oh, well, what's the damage?" And they ran me through the breakdown of what had happened to my body.
Yeah.
And I said, "Oh, I wasn't talking about the body. What happened to the car?"
Mm.
And and they said, "Well, we haven't found it yet, but they did eventually." And yeah,
Hmm.
it's
Right.
one of those components to the story.
Yeah. So in terms of your, I mean, that's a terrible situation. Uh, in terms then of your career and what was next, what realizations had you come to?
Basically, um, at that point in time, when you're looking at general survival,
Hmm.
um, everything else goes out the window.
Hmm.
Um, and I think on top of that as well is a combination of the traumatic brain injury. I wasn't really in the position to cognitively um, establish the 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 magnitude of the situation
Hmm.
um, because when people approach you and tell you that you you know you spent periods throughout the last few days not with us anymore.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
it sort of puts cycling into context,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and and that reality uh, is only something that can come to can become to terms with over a long period of time. Um, so so yeah, it's an interesting one to reflect on.
I have to stop um,
Okay.
for whatever reason. Um, well, look, uh, we, I think what's interesting about where we're at in your journey is the, the injuries. It's been, you've had several setbacks from injuries throughout your cycling career. At what point, I guess after this one, the hit and run, what was different about this incident uh, compared to the others?
Um, I suppose the the gravity of the incident itself, um, because from a not just a physiological point of view, the the basic impossibility for me to function as I had done so previously
Mhm.
um, was no longer there, and also um, and also cognitively, um, the things that I, even at that point, um, tried to readjust within my life, um, whether that be um, the capability to have normal conversations with people,
Mhm.
um, articulate my own feelings, or display um, you know my behaviors, or
Mm.
whether that be affection or um, you know sorrow,
Yeah.
um, excitement, all of the above, um, weren't really on any spectrum at all. It was kind of blurred,
Right.
and um, with that inability came, um, to be honest, quite a bit of fear, um, the not the not knowing,
Mhm.
um, purely because I wasn't able to engage with people the way in which I had done so throughout my life beforehand. Yeah.
Yeah. So for you then, recognizing it, was it at this point where you, I guess, from an interpersonal perspective, but then also from a physical, from a cycling perspective, recognized, well, life is now going to be different.
Yeah, I suppose it was the start of my uh, my real journey into uh, the transition, um, which um, which has been a long one. And um, I remember uh, just getting it across to you the other day, giving some details about how long it has been since 2014,
Mhm.
um, and the way in which it's taken place has been nothing short of uh, incredible, because um, having the capabilities to recognize things on the spot and
Mhm.
say to myself, even back then, um, would have been interesting, because they may have been able to provide me with a lifestyle catering to the needs of someone who's you know just been taken out by a car with
Yeah.
a previous career in cycling. Um, but having been through what I've been through now,
Yeah.
um, it's very, very different. and has probably allowed me to explore myself in a very different way. So
Yeah.
it's
What so what has this period, we talk about this transition period, and you get to explore yourself. How do you think it has marked you in terms of knowing more about yourself?
well, I think the the marking procedure um, has allowed me to really establish myself
Mm,
in in acknowledging what it is to be human, for one,
mm,
and also
mm,
um, what it is to have uh, your essential passions, um,
yeah.
on really how to focus, um, placing it simply, attaching emotion to things, being able to recognize when to agitate a situation to get the traction that you need with people on an interpersonal level. And
Mm,
that's not negative agitation, that's just getting in touch with people.
yeah.
Um, and then the way that that promotes the capability to repeat those actions, um, in order to perfect the lifestyle in which I'm choosing to live now.
Mhm.
Um, and and I think the mark that it makes for me is um, the capability to recognise um, the contribution that I can have for not just for myself but for others as well.
Mhm.
Um, and and it probably only took um, the last phase of the last, you know, 10 years in order for me to recognize those in myself, um,
Yes.
and be able to take from that the things that I believe, I'm looking forward to spreading with others now.
Mhm. And so talk to me about that. Talk to me about that shift from, I guess, you, the cyclist, um, seeking that joy and freedom from, um, competing, cycling around the world, to how you see, that passion. What's your passion now, and what is next for you, what is now for you in many respects, I suppose.
Yeah, the transition obviously came about not through purely my experience within the cycling world,
Mhm.
um, and all the professional concepts of that, and the capability to do the things that you love and adore in order to flourish. Um, but also the recognition of change for transition, which came about more so for me um, in the the rehabilitation that took place over the last 10 years,
Mhm.
which involved um, a number of occasions uh, in private short-term institutions,
Yeah.
um, addressing substance use, uh, and also my brain injury,
Mhm.
um, and also throughout last year, spending 12 months in full time rehabilitation,
Mhm.
um, looking at uh, behavioral change models, and pattern recognition in order to establish where it is throughout my ways and mindsets of thinking that had led to detrimental components of my lifestyle taking place, and ways in which to fix them.
Yeah.
Which, interestingly enough, as I said to you the other day, were things that I'd become well adapted to throughout my sports psychology practice, looking at others and their sporting characteristics, and picking up or identifying and being able to recognize behaviors in my own life in a totally
Yeah.
different sphere was very, very interesting. And being able to look at it not so much from a peripheral angle, but from a first person basis, because I was the one exhibiting those behaviors, which was challenging, but
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
a huge learning process, and something I'm really, really pleased to have taken part in.
I mean, and look, that's interesting because you kind of you went there, straight away, which is really good because I suppose I wanted to get an understanding of what you're doing today, but then this past 10 years has been quite the journey for you. And like you say, from your own review, it sounds like first you started looking at from a sports psychology performance perspective in others, but then that flipped and you started recognizing some of those habits in yourself, and you've gone deeper in recognizing those habits in yourself. And I'm interested then on, over this period, in terms of that rehabilitation mentally for yourself. Why you've often used the word rehabilitation, and I suppose I've missed a bit of at what point did it break down? At what point? So, what makes you think or feel that you had to rebuild?
I suppose the darkest period came around between 4 to 3 years ago,
Mhm.
and it was a period in which I had come to the final components throughout my studies, and was continuing to just work with um, a really great group of independent local athletes, but there was the unfortunate thing where I ended up letting them go because I wasn't able to provide for them the things that I really should have been able to. And I knew that of myself. And during that time period, and I really don't like the fact that that I sort of feel obliged to say this, but throughout the COVID period, it wasn't really an optimal time for people, in a global sense, but particularly for one who was hiding their complete lifestyle um, in ways in which are purely detrimental for any form of progress,
Hmm.
which came about for me in horrendous abuse of alcohol um, and uh, and and other medications, which
Yeah.
um, unfortunately led to my hospitalization on you know
Hmm.
on many occasions, and and yeah, some really really bad uh, bad outcomes. Um,
Mm.
so it was within these points of time in which um, I was beyond the point of recognizing the damage that I was doing to myself, and
Right.
then uh, purely due to the fact that my family having the strength and support that they have always provided me,
Hmm.
um, and the friendship group that I'd always surrounded myself with, um, I was able to not just be told but recognize that this darkness could only be um, be challenged by me getting the help that I needed, because I certainly wasn't in the position to give it to myself. Um,
No, and
I
early,
needed to take that step.
right, and earlier in your career, you spoke about it. You weren't ready to ask for help. Um, you know, the support structure that you had around you at this time, clearly different, allowed you to recognize that help was necessary and it could get you out of the current position you're in.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And so from that point of, I mean, it's great that vulnerability that you went in. What was, the damage you're doing to yourself, perhaps the damage to certainly emotionally to others. To what extent were you functioning in life? What was going on for you outside of that? Were you able to hold down work or hold down career or anything along those lines?
Um, Basically, I wouldn't classify it as holding down um, much at all.
Hmm.
Um, I was able to sort of get by, um, but even the short term jobs that I was doing um, were part time, and they they weren't done in any capacity that I could call myself being proud of. Um,
Hmm.
and a lot of what I was doing um, was filling time and just formulating gaps in between other periods of time to avoid loneliness. And it's hard because in these periods, um, you know, you sort of look back at it now, and uh, it's very easy for me um, to look at sort of someone else in a similar situation and and say that that's quite pitiful because they're not doing anything for themselves. Um, but to be in that position, have had experience in that world, um, and the feeling of you know uh, of helplessness because you can't even put things together to help yourself is demoralizing. And
Right.
it's like the old saying that the higher you are, the harder you fall, um,
Mm.
is quite true because when you have been at the top of the world in in anything, I believe, when you're really down in the dirt, just grabbing onto something that's going to save you seems as if it's going to take way too much energy. Or for me,
What?
a lot of the time, I was stuck in what a lot of people will refer to as the B zone, where
The B zone. Yeah.
you know the effort that it takes to get yourself out of a situation to be comfortable is far too great, and just being in the shit that you're sitting in at the moment can be comfortable enough.
Right.
So
Yeah.
you're
Well,
sort of in a paradox,
yeah.
and getting out of it just seems like way too much. And
Yeah.
you know, and it's also challenging too, because the people that you know too well know a lot better of you, and
Mhm.
they expect to see you on the front foot the whole time,
Yes.
because that's the way that you have carried yourself out throughout your entire life. But now
Yeah.
you're not in that zone anymore.
No. So from, well, as poetic as it sounds, but from King of the Mountains, what do you see as your lowest point during this transition?
Um, Probably just before it got better, before putting my hand up. It would have been 2023. Um, there were times where I didn't know who I really was anymore. Um, I didn't exactly know what I was doing with myself. And more importantly, I didn't know why I was doing the things that I was doing. Um, and all the while, um, had tremendous people backing me. Whether that be my family, the school I went to, you know, being in the Hall of Fame there, and like a long and amazingly strong list of people who would be in there to support me 100% all of the time. Um, just didn't know about my story because I'd not told anyone about it, and uh, yeah, um, there was nothing left, and you know
Mhm.
the
And so, what was your motivation to, to you asked for help, you took the help, you got the help. What was that motivation, or indeed, you spoke before about visualization of races and finding that flow. How has that type of ability, that athletic ability, supported you to come through the therapy and get to where you are today?
well, to break it down, basically, I got to such a low point. Um, I thought to myself one day, if it can't really get any lower than this, um, what more can I get from the life itself? So pretty much from that point in time, um, and it was simultaneous to the commencement of my full time treatment, I started to acknowledge things uh, for what they are, um, and the blessings that they bring to me, and whether that's just the simplicity of real connection, the honesty of truth when it comes to people telling you, you know, whatever's on their mind.
Yeah.
The you know the real nature of the world, and the way, you know, I could have this capability to acknowledge people's, um, people's strengths, and it was sort of more vivid to me because I'd seen what it felt like to be um, without that, and to provide myself with the insights into how I could get back, um, and redefine for myself who I was, um, would really really crystallize the fact about what living is, um, and that feeling you get when you are a child and everything is exciting.
Right.
So I had to really, put simply, work from the ground up. Um, and as I did so, all the elements, and the incremental gains became more exciting because I discovered more about myself and more about the
Yes.
ways other people can exhibit their, expressions and their intrinsic joys. Um, and then obviously through the process, um, you know, you start to gain more self awareness, and the different components of the transition start to take place because I gathered, my capability to reconnect with others that I hadn't spoken to in a long time. Um, and the feedback that I got from that was a sensation for me of tenfold because I was excited to reconnect, and so were they. So it was
Right.
reciprocated.
hmm
Um,
That's wonderful.
yeah, and I mean all the beneficial things that people hear about, um, through different recovery journeys were there, but having felt it firsthand, um, through through the depths of the incidents and then the addiction itself, and then being able to flip it round and look at it from a totally different perspective, allowed me to shed light on things in a totally different way, um, which is really really good. And
Yeah.
it's only through vulnerability and openness that we get those opportunities to put ourselves in the places we probably didn't expect ourselves to be in,
Yeah.
and that's really something special.
Yeah. Yes, it is. So, Matthew, where are you today? What's your purpose? That new purpose, that new passion for you nowadays?
My new purpose, I suppose, what I really really want to try and get across, um, is really helping people um, to reestablish themselves, um, in a in a performance uh, role, not just in the sports world, but in anyone's world, um, from a mentor's perspective, or a consultancy perspective, because a lot of people, I feel, need to be in a safe space to acknowledge their strengths, um, and break their things down to get a real baseline, um, to measure. the achievable things that they've got in their lives that are relevant to them, on a personal or professional objective set in a timely way, which is a very, very simple way of looking at it.
it's,
But
it's simple, but not necessarily easy to achieve.
exactly. And, when I do speak to people these days, given the fact that I have been through a journey of my own, I like to think that the advice or suggestions that I can give people are of some value. What I do note is, I remember speaking to you about it the other day in the world these days, which is saturated by a whole bunch of instant gratification through the internet and whatnot about people's capabilities to offer lifestyle changes wrapped in cotton wool in the magical forest, rubbing some
Mhm.
oil into your body. Like I'm not really into that at all.
Mhm.
I'll just tell people the truth,
Yeah,
and they appreciate that. Um, and you know, and and optimistically, they'll be able to tell me some truth about their stories
yeah.
and make way with it. So, um, yeah, I have been working with um, an organisation here in Melbourne called Be Future Fit, um,
Mhm.
and they've been excellent. Building
And
building my uh, sort of character profile in
right,
order to allow space for myself to get in touch with people who um, have had similar, addiction issues or
yeah,
transitional.
yeah. And you're able to share with them from a lived experience
Yeah,
what it's what it's like to go through it, but then also perhaps the the toolkit to help navigate that as well.
yeah, exactly. Um, and you know, it's it's one of those things too where the the more and more um, I'm able to place myself uh, in the open position to talk about my story, the more um, the more traction it gets, purely because um, someone knows someone or they themselves have suffered um, similar situations, whether
Mhm.
that's psychologically or physically, um, and they'd love someone to speak to about it.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
yeah, brilliant, brilliant. So look, Matthew, I suppose I've certainly enjoyed our sort of winding conversation, and I, for those listening, when you think about the types of advice that you give for those who are going through the type of transition that you have gone through, what are the key points of advice that or guidance that you'd give to them?
Um, I think the main points of advice for others would be to um, to find meaning in your hardships, which is pretty basic. But if for whatever you're doing, um, as hard as it is, there's got to be a value in it, um, and that might take some time to discover. Um, but it does happen, um, and I think probably as well as that, um, then the harder things become, the better it'll be on the other side, which can be sort of grim to look at in an upfront perspective, because, you can say, well, that wall is 50 meters high. There's no possible way to get over it. But if you know that on the other side is your children, or, the person you really, really need to become or to be with, then you'll find a way. And the discipline and self-respect you'll get through just the trying to do so brings huge rewards. So there's always a lot of advice to give, but we don't really learn anything too deeply by reading about it. We've got to live it ourselves. So.
And look, and I think the guidance or the advice that you've provided there is something that comes from, one, a point of care, but then secondly, that point of lived experience, and demonstrating here like you said, the ups and downs, that habit recognition that you've gone through. And it's great to share this past hour and a bit with you to understand a bit more of your story and sort of navigate how you've worked through, and I guess are still working through that career, that transition from cycling to now giving back in that mentor capacity.
Yeah, it's been it's definitely been a journey, and if anything else, it's taught me about self-accountability and the rewards of taking on board, your actions, for the better and sometimes the worse. So
yeah. Matthew, I just got to say thanks very much for joining us today. It was absolutely a thrilling conversation, so very thought-provoking along the way. So thanks very much for sharing.
Thank you so much, Ryan. It's been a pleasure.